And if not, if it just reaches one person, I've done my job. But here we go. My shackled inheritance. I was 9 months old when my father was arrested for a violent and dangerous string of robberies and went to prison for all of my life. My first memory of him was seeing his shackled body in a visiting cubicle in the Los Angeles County Jail. My mother took me to see him before he went to prison to begin his decades-long sentence. She soon became lost without his steady hand and strength of presence and succumbed to the oppressive forces of drugs and crime that were prevalent in my neighborhood. The Los Angeles County Department of Children's Services thus saw fit to remove me from her custody and place me in the foster care system on September 6, 1995, the day before I turned 13. I was 13 years old the second and last time I saw my father. He was shackled with waist chains and leg irons, looking ahead stoically as he sat in the courtroom of the Edmund P. Edelman Children's Courthouse in Monterey Park, California, in December of 1995. He was there to advocate for children's services to place me with a member of his family. It seemed to me at the time as if it was designed for me to only see my father shackled. My heart beat quickened with fear, sadness, and confusion at the sight of James Wilburn Minifield III, whose DNA and legacy I inherited. He was chained like a dangerous animal, with 2 sheriff's deputies standing guard behind him like zookeepers. Yet, his intellect and the resolute defiance that was apparent to me in his facial expressions and body language also filled me with intense love and awe. His shoulders were not slumped, and he did not look defeated. It was in that moment that I became overwhelmed with love and a yearning for his presence in my life. After the hearing, my father's zookeepers allowed us a brief hug and visit behind glass. I remember hugging him and feeling how solid he was. He did not smile or show any outward affection. He merely looked me in the eye and said, "I love you." I sat in the visiting cubicle shortly after that hug, eagerly awaiting our visit. I watched sadly from the other side of a solid plexiglass pane as deputies escorted my father into the room. I watched him gracefully and proudly put his arms through the slot to have his cuffs and shackles removed. I was so awestruck at the sight of this man who was a hero in my eyes, mainly because I grew up around people who had nothing but good things to say about him. To them, he was quote unquote a soldier, strong, a good dude. He didn't back down from anything. He didn't have an ounce of weakness in his body or character, unquote. I viewed him through this lens that day in December of 1995. I loved and missed my father so much and felt an intense pride that I was a son. I didn't see him as a violent criminal or danger to society. He was my father, my image of a quote unquote real man, a real black man. In my eyes, he was a freedom fighter like George Jackson, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Mutulu Shakur, and the many other strong, fearless black men who were shackled and in prison simply because they were fighting for a world in which the color of one's skin no longer determines their destiny in life. That day with my father was the last time I would see him throughout my entire life. While we sat gazing upon each other, my hero imparted some life lessons that greatly influenced my behavior moving forward. Lessons in his version of authentic manhood that I internalized and came to believe a quote unquote real black man should be. Always remember, son, he said, laying down, giving up is not an option. Your word is your bond. Without your word, you are nothing. Don't be a punk. Don't let nobody treat you like a woman. If somebody threatens you, you get them before they get you. These words deeply settled into my heart and my soul, and they contributed to my desire to get my own set of shackles. Looking back on that moment and my life in general, I now see that shackles have defined my existence since the day I was born and represented many things at different points in my life. According to the 5th edition of Webster's New College Dictionary, a shackle is a metal fastening usually one of a linked pair, for the wrist or ankle of a prisoner. The term is also defined as anything that restrains freedom of expression or action. Shackles have represented just that in my life: physical, mental, and emotional captivity. From the day I was born a person of color in America, I have only known poverty, abuse, the destruction of my family structure through drugs, crime, and mass incarceration, and legal discrimination. During my struggle to survive these oppressive conditions, I learned from the people around me to seek solace and safety in gang activity, criminal behavior, violence, and ultimately life imprisonment. As I progressed through life after that fateful visit with my father, shackles did not become my source of shame, but that of pride. In my mind and heart, if a man was shackled for any reason, he was a force to be reckoned with. I walked proudly in my shackles each time I was placed on buses to be transported back and forth to courthouses, juvenile correctional facilities, and prisons. When I got around other children like me, I started to see that they too were proud of their shackles. Between the ages of 14 and 18, I was in the custody of the California Youth Authority at one of the most dangerous youth facilities in California at that time. In the Fred C. Nellis Youth Correctional Facility in Whittier, California, violence and aggression were cultural norms. Children would solve their disputes with fistfights, riots, a pair of batteries in a sock, or rage-fueled stabbings. I remember the scenes vividly because they all played out the same. The disagreement would start over a perceived slight. No matter how small the slight, violence would ensue. Within seconds, youth correctional officers would intervene with pepper spray and shackles. Once the officers subdued the young combatants, they would place them in shackles, pull them off the ground, and escort them to the segregation unit, affectionately known as the hole. The pattern of behavior would play out the same every time. These children walked proudly, with their chests puffed out, looking angry, proud, and defiant. Other children who looked on yelled, "That's right, homie. That's how you handle your business." The young combatants would return from the hole days later with a hero's welcome. They were now considered to be quote-unquote rioters and soldiers. I craved that label badly, and I took that walk so many times. It got to a point where I became addicted to taking this walk and engaged in more extreme acts of violence. Youth correctional staff eventually designated me as a dangerous ward and placed me in long-term segregation. This meant that I had to be shackled whenever I came out of my cell for any reason. I had finally earned my own set of shackles. When I was eventually released from CYA, my desire for shackles progressed to more violence and more victims. In fact, my desire for shackles became so great that the state of California deemed it necessary to fit me with my own set of shackles for a term of 50 years to life. During my incarceration, I have reflected on my life and educated myself. The more I learned about my history and my family, I began seeing shackles from the perspective of anger and resentment towards whites and people in authority. I learned that the use of shackles on African Americans has been a reality since before this nation's founding. When slave traders captured and transported African slaves to the Americas in slave ships, crews would strip them naked, chain them up, and force them to lay down on their sides or lay head to feet so that they could fit in as many people as possible. I also learned that American society has criminalized African Americans, starting with enslavement. Federal, state, and local governments, in order to subjugate African Americans and maintain their enslaved status, criminalize African Americans as a way to control them. This system survived the abolition of slavery and the Civil War. Once enslavement ended, white Americans created a new legal and social system to continue to socially control and exploit approximately 4 million African Americans. As America entered the 20th century, law enforcement agencies implemented more aggressive policing of minority communities and mandated longer prison sentences for those arrested. The explosive growth of mass incarceration exacted a heavy toll on African American communities long into the 21st century. This perhaps explains why shackles have been an enduring part of my family legacy. I did some research through Ancestry.com and learned that Tarver Minifield, the first documented ancestor on my paternal line, was a convicted horse thief in Williamson County, Texas in 1877, just 12 years after the end of the Civil War. I also learned from my father that he was present at the intersection of 116th Street and Avalon Boulevard at the beginning of the 1965 Watts riots, and was greatly influenced by the Black Panthers and other Black Power movements. He recently explained, "Son, I had no respect for the laws of society because the laws of society didn't respect me. The law didn't protect me from oppression and racial subjugation, so I did whatever I wanted and needed to do in order to survive. That's why all of my victims were white. I never took from my own people." This statement helped me see my father and the significance of shackles in my life from a different perspective. My father has simply passed down to me what was given to him: anger, resistance, rebellion, and pride. He tried to show me that he is a survivor, that his circumstances do not define him, nor should they define me. He was trying to give me tools to survive the unnatural existence that was designed for a Black man living in America. However, these tools did not help me survive, but they served to shackle my mind and heart with anger, crime, rebellion, and violence. To understand how I view shackles today, consider that Assata Shakur once said, "It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains." Today, I view shackles with an unshackled mind. I understand that my ancestors were physically shackled, brought to this land, and forced to labor for the benefit of everyone but themselves. As a result, my ancestors shackled their minds with unbridled anger and resentment, hopelessness, and misguided rebellion and resistance. My ancestors then passed this legacy down to every generation that bears the Minifield name. However, that legacy ends with me. I no longer have to live a life shackled with the ruinous effects of trauma, oppression, and abuse. I have the right and responsibility to throw off these shackles and live a life that alters the trajectory of the Minifield legacy. Today, I no longer accept the belief that violence and crime are my only tools of survival. Instead, my tools of success are now education, love, spirituality, and unity. I accept and embrace my father and understand that he was only giving me what he believed was best. However, I eschew that legacy in exchange for a new one. While I inherited the legacy of shackles, my future generations will inherit the liberating power of education, emotional intelligence, love, mercy, unity, forgiveness, and prosperity. I have chosen to educate myself and heal from the legacy of trauma and criminality in my family. I choose to control my emotions and treat others how I want to be treated. I accept the reality of racism in America, but choose to respond with dignity. I have chosen other examples of how a Black man can excel in American society. I look at the examples of Thurgood Marshall, the Tuskegee Airmen, General Benjamin O. Davis, and Bryan Stevenson. I choose to use the shackle as an example of the indomitable spirit of a man determined to prevail over his circumstances. My hope is that the African American community as a whole will see it the same way. Thank you.